Coker to take it over and kindly introduce our today's speaker with the viewers and participants. I request all the participants to mute themselves.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our speaker of the day is Ms. Siddhi Mittal, advocate. She is graduated in BBA LLB honors from Amity University, Uttar Pradesh. Also, specialized in business laws and cybersecurity. She is a practicing advocate at Supreme Court of India, Delhi High Court, District Court, DRT, NCDRC, NGT, and also in Allahabad High Court. Her practice area are arbitration, criminal, civil, matrimonial. She has assisted various advocates representing the Delhi police. For example, so am I audible to everyone?
Yes, Kriti, you are audible.
Okay, so she has assisted various advocates representing the Delhi police. For example, the famous Suhaib LIC murder case in Delhi High Court, criminal reference by Miss Kamini Lau, represented various firms in arbitration and mergers. Today, ma'am will be speaking on environmental law, NGT, practice and procedure. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Kriti. Thank you so much, Nitesh sir, for having me on board. And thank you all the participants. So today's webinar is Environmental Law, NGT, which is the National Green Tribunal, Procedure and Practice. So the focus on the webinar today is to make you understand what are the basic components in environmental law, the terminologies that we come across on daily basis, what do we understand by those terminologies, and also what are the laws in India governing the environmental protection. We'll start by what do we understand by the term environment. So it's a very general term. We use it on a daily basis. But environment is difficult to define. In normal meaning, related to its normal meaning is the surroundings. But obviously that concept is which is relatable to whatever object it is surrounded with. I remember Einstein once observed that the environment is everything that isn't me. So basically everything around me is the environment. And protecting all of that which is around me under the ambit of environmental law. So the next question that comes into my mind when we discuss is that what is the need for environmental law? The protection of environment is a global issue and it's not an isolated problem of any area or any nation in particular. With the decline in the quality of environment, so the concern towards the environment has grown and it has been witnessed by increasing population. It is a basic right to all to live in a healthy environment. It's your fundamental right. The crying need of the hour is sustainable development. So in order to achieve sustainable development, environment protection constitutes an integral part of the development process and it cannot be considered in isolation. So sustainable development, I'm sure everybody who's here has come across in their lives once, maybe, taught in school, because there are a lot of students who are pursuing law in this webinar. Maybe they have already studied environmental law. So this is a very common term which we use. So what do you exactly mean by sustainable development? So sustainable development, if I go in a sustainable development's background a little, so it was first discussed in Stockholm Declaration, which was for the environment. And later on, it was defined more, given a more definite shape and given proper principles in the Stockholm Declaration. So the general meaning of an actual meaning of sustainable development means to meet the needs of the present generation without having to compromise the needs of the future generation. So the resources that are available to me as a person should be available to my future generation also. The basic principles governing the sustainable development are first, conserving natural resources, because that is the main agenda behind it. Second, environment protection, because obviously if we are conserving natural resources, then we are protecting the environment. Second, the precautionary principle. And third, the polluter pay principle. So the precautionary and polluter pay principle we will be discussing in length after I just cite one very famous case. This is the Vellore Citizen Welfare Forum versus the Union of India. So we'll discuss this case in detail when we'll talk about the Environment Protection Act. So just I want to give a gist, and I mentioned this case here with the intention how sustainable development is related with this case. So initially a public interest litigation, which is the PIL, was filed under Article 32 of the Indian Constitution. Petition was filed on a very large scale pollution caused to river Palar due to the discharge of untreated effluents by the tanneries and the industries in the province and the vicinity of Tamil Nadu. So this was the case that was filed there. So we'll discuss the said case law in detail once we discuss the provisions, like I said. But here the sustainable development, what Supreme Court directed the central government in this very particular case to constitute an authority with all the powers to deal with cases and shall be guided by the certain concepts keeping in mind. One being polluter pay, second being precautionary principle, third being sustainable development. So basically the ideology for establishing such a authority was to balance the ecology and the development. Now this polluter pay principle, what do we understand? What is polluter pay? If I bifurcate the two words, polluter is the person who pollutes the environment, and pay, that person has to pay. This is the very basic and a very layman language definition. So the concept is that the person causing the damage to the environment shall be held liable not only to compensate the victims, but also to restore the environment to its original condition. So you are not just compensating, you are also restoring the environment to its original condition or position, however. Once the activity is carried on, and you know that it is dangerous, the person doing that activity is well aware that this activity is dangerous, then the person carrying out such activity shall be liable to compensate for any loss, be that as it may any loss, even if he took reasonable care. So your plea or your argument that I took all the precautions, no. If you're polluting it, it is dangerous. First, you have to compensate. Second, you have to make sure that you restore the environment to its original condition. Thirdly, in the concept of polluter pay, the polluter has absolute liability. So I would like to focus on the word absolute liability under this principle, because he does not only have to compensate and he has to restore. A very famous case law we've all read about is Andolan. So the polluter pay was discussed in detail here in the Narmada Bachao Andolan judgment. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
request everyone to kindly mute themselves.
Should I repeat the polluter pay principle?
Yes, ma'am, you can continue.
Yeah. So I don't know if we heard the polluter pay principle or not. So I will just give a little brief summarization of what I said, because I didn't realize that I was muted. So what we discussed was the polluter pay principle is the polluter is the person who pollutes the environment. Under this principle, he does not only have to compensate the victims, but he also has to restore the environment to its original position. So he has this absolute liability. He has to do two things. He cannot just get away with one, that you know that I have compensated and I will just get away, I've done my part. No, you have to make sure that you take knows that the activity which he's carrying out is dangerous. Then also he has to make sure that he takes all reasonable care. Because the argument that he took all the reasonable care will not be very justifiable if the activity that he carried causes a lot of environmental degradation. So the case law that I mentioned here under the polluter principle was Narmada Bachao Andolan. I am sure everybody has come across this Narmada Bachao Andolan case. Now moving on to precautionary principle. Now what is the precautionary principle? If people, because there are certain advocates also, that are practicing in NGT. So it's a very common terminology that we use. What is a precautionary principle? And it's a very common terminology when we come across the judgments passed by the honorable benches there. So the main concept is to take necessary measures and to protect the environment from activities or substances causing environmental pollution. As the word defines, we have to take precautions, right? So the basic ingredients, I will just not take much of a time on this very particular concept. We'll just do it point wise. So first is you take precautions. It is an internationally recognized, it is a well discussed concept. All the Stockholm Declaration, Rio Declaration, in various UN forums also. It is adopted by United Nations Environment Program. So here one thing which is very important and I would like you to take note of it is that the onus of proof the onus of proof in this precautionary principle lies on the polluter, that he has to establish before the court that what he did was in good faith and he did not have malified intentions, because at the end of the day everything revolves around intentions. Secondly, moving on, the person must anticipate, prevent, attack the causes of environmental degradation. Having good faith is not just enough. When you recognize your problem, you have to anticipate ki if I do certain things, what are my drawbacks, what are the problems that I will be coming across, and how can I take and what measures can I take to maybe overcome them. Lack of scientific certainty should not be a reason for postponing measures. This is not this is not your plea and this will not be entertained. That lack of scientific certainty should be there. There were not this, there not that. So that is not going to be entertained under the environmental laws or before NGT or the Supreme Court. Now moving on, environmental protection in India. In talking, although it's a global issue, we'll not go there. But talking in India, about India in particular. So in India, as elsewhere in the world, uncontrolled growth and consequent environmental deterioration are fast assuming proportions. Global warming, ozone depletion, and toxic pollution are effects of existing development strategies. If we talk numbers, I will just give you a survey that had happened and the World Bank had done. So according to the World Bank estimates, the figures are very funny to me. India loses approx $80 billion annually on account of sickness and death from environmental pollution and economic costs attributable to resources degradation. $80 billion honestly is not a very small amount. And also in addition, approx $20 billion a year in purchasing power parity. So we are investing a lot of money, and over the top, we are the expenses are much more than that. If we go to a little ancient times to bring that environmental protection, and we relate it to the religious cultures also. So I would just like to summarize it by saying that the ancient Indian law on environment protection is found in Kautilya's Arthashastra. I don't know if a lot of you are familiar with this word or not, but it was found there. So the origin in India comes from there. So in earlier days, every individual, it was the dharma of every individual to protect the society, protect the nature, worship its objects. And now, I would like to quote, there's a very famous author, Professor Faris Diwan. In his book, he has, and in certain lectures, he emphasizes on the fact that India has become a pollution-loving nation. So if we compare the scenarios, it is a very shameful situation. Now, coming on to what is Environment Protection Act. So, Environment Protection Act came in a picture in 1986. Now, I'll just give you a brief introduction. What is the basic concept of Environment Protection Act? So with the decline in the quality of environment, like I said, the concern rose and people became more aware over the time. From time to time, various legislations have been passed by the Indian government to protect the environment. But the Environment Protection 1986, short form EPA, is the most comprehensive act till date relating to the environment in India, which is enacted under the Article 253 of the Indian Constitution. So, under Article 253, this very act, Environment Protection Act, came into picture. And it is the most detailed, most comprehensive act till date. Obviously, amendments come due to change in society and everything. But still, it is a very vast and it's a very simple language. The language that is used is very simple. Now, coming on to what are the objects of the act? What do we focus mainly when we talk about Environment Protection Act? First, to implement the decisions made in the UN conference at Stockholm. So like I said earlier, sustainable development and the need to protect the environment was firstly discussed in Stockholm Declaration. Certain principles were laid down in the declaration as to how one can govern the protection of environment. So Environment Protection Act mainly focuses and emphasizes on first, whatever principles were laid down, whatever principles were discussed, we implement that in our country. Okay. Then moving on, central general laws or environment protection laws, which could under the government. Am I audible, sir? It is asking me to unmute.
Ma'am, you're audible.
Yes, yes.
Right.
Audible.
Moving on. Thank you, Shobhit sir. So the focus of Environment Protection Act is to fill the gaps fill the lacunas that have been there in our legislation, enact general laws and protect already established laws. It also focuses on coordination of activities of various regulatory agencies of the government and recreations of authorities with time to time change in circumstances. We also the object is also to provide appropriate punishment or penalties, if we say the actual word, under this act for any person who violates the sections. It ensures sustainable development is protected and the environment is protected in its best form. Under Article 21, like I said, every person, it is a right to live in a healthy environment. So the Environment Protection Act focuses on preserving all these laid down laws. Stockholm Declaration on Human Environment proclaimed that man is both the creator and the molder of his environment, which gives him physical substance. So focusing on that and deriving from that principle, very principle, I will discuss in short, not in detail, the certain provisions under the Environment Protection Act and the main sections that are governed and that are followed by the National Green Tribunal. So there are certain powers, general powers as we may call it, of the central government to protect and improve the environment. So these are laid down from Section 3 to Section 6 of the Act. They talk about the general powers of the central government. So initially starting with, in two lines, I will summarize everything. Section 3(1), there are certain subclauses to it. So subclause 1 empowers the central governments to take all such measures as may be necessary for protecting and improving the quality of the environment, right? Moving on to subclause 2. Now, when we talk about that the central government has to take measures, now what measures they may include? So the subsection 2 defines and lays down the measures that the central government may include. So one being coordination of action by the state government. So it is very important for the state and the center to coordinate. Then laying down standards of quality to be maintained in the environment. We cannot just allow everything. We have to maintain certain standards. Then we also have to restrict areas in which industries cannot operate, right? And certain areas where they shall not carry any activities, because there are certain very vulnerable areas where the protection is very necessary because they get polluted in a very fast manner, right? So we have to restrict those areas. Then laying down standards for the amount of emission of those environment pollutants. You can't just say that jitna marzi, you can pollute as much as you want. No, we have to restrict that. You will have to lay down the guidelines. A particular industry will have to have this much pollutants released in one day. Now, inspection of plants, whatever plants are being there by the industries, the state government and the central government, both individually, they have to inspect it, right? They have to, because, and then only they give an NOC, and then they forward it to the concerned authorities. So basically that is the procedure. Once you get the approval, then central government's team comes for inspection, then the state's team comes for inspection also, and they give you NOC, and then you can carry it out. So this case, it's a very famous case. We must have heard about MC Mehta. He is one of the most important and most eminent names when we talk about environment law, because he is a very active person filing PILs related to environmental laws. So this case that I'm referring to in particular is MC Mehta versus Union of India, which is AIR 1992. So the Supreme Court directed all cinema halls. This is just an example of the measures that we just discussed, that Supreme Court directed the cinema halls to show a slide free of cost on environmental pollution to make people aware, because not everybody is aware what is allowed and what is not allowed within the ambit of environmental law. Supreme Court here also directed the radios and the televisions to timely advertise and promote awareness in people, giving such information in all regional languages, to be more precise, because the more and more people, the idea is that more and more people should be aware about it. It should spread on a wider scale. So moving on to section 3, subsection 3. So now, this very particular subclause empowers the central governments to constitute an authority or authorities, as the case may be, which can take necessary steps and measures for improving environment conditions. So earlier discussed, I had mentioned the Law Citizen Welfare Forum versus the Union of India. So here, very particularly, like I said, this was a PIL filed under Article 32, because there were a lot of pollutants coming from a lot of tanneries and industries near River Palar in the state of Tamil Nadu. So what was the main concept here in the judgment, and by Supreme Court, what all were the directions given by the Supreme Court here? So main purpose of this act is to create an authority. Supreme Court very categorically, and in fact after this only judgment, this section was enacted and the subclause was enacted, that the main purpose of the act is to create an authority with adequate powers. They should not have that, I don't have this power, you approach Supreme Court for this. No, we should have an authority and adequate power given to them to control the pollution and protect the environment, taking necessary steps. So therefore, Supreme Court in a very short manner, in a very precise and crisp manner, laid down those principles on how to deal with environmental protection and how to safeguard from environmental degradation. Like we discussed, one being polluter pay, second precautionary principle, and third being sustainable development. Now moving on to section 4. Section 4 of the Act. It empowers the central government to appoint officers with designations and powers which shall be under the direct control of the central government. So now when we talk about constituting an authority or a committee, we have to have certain minimum requirements for people in that authority, maybe certain experts, experts, if we talk about the NGD panel, which we will be discussing in the webinar further, they have to have certain and minimum designation. Not everybody can actually be given the power, right? So section 4 mainly focuses on empowering those authorities in a very adequate manner, and how and what all people can be appointed. Moving on, section 5. Central government can give some directions as to closure of an industry. Okay, so here, when I say that the central government can give directions, what I really mean is they are not giving absolute power to that authority, because like I mentioned in the earlier section, that they want to have some control, right? The central government wants to have some control. So at any point of time, when the central government feels that this industry or this pollution is causing a lot of environmental pollution or degradation, so at any point of time, they can give directions, they can issue directions for closure of that industry. Last but not the least here, section 6. Central government can formulate the rules to regulate environmental pollution in a way that with the change in circumstances, with the like the society is growing on a daily basis, there are different needs of the environment. So accordingly, the central government can formulate the rules and improvise them as per the needs. Now, when we talk about environmental protection, a very important topic that has to be discussed is prevention control of environmental pollution, because you can protect and everything, but you have to prevent with what is ongoing at the very moment. So as a very basic terminology, the term environment includes land, water, air, and the relationship between land, water, and air. So like I stated earlier, it's everything around me constitutes an environment, and the relationship between them constitutes the relationship of the environment, between all the living creatures, between the living creatures and the land, the living creatures and the air, etc. So from section 7 to section 15, we talk about prevention and control. So these are very important sections that we on a regular basis deal in NGT when we talk about Environment Protection Act. So section 7 provides that certain standards are to be maintained and no person or industry can be permitted to cause environment pollution, because end of the day, our agenda is to prevent and control, right? And not promote environment pollution. So moving on to section 8, I will not be discussing these sections in detail. If anybody has any query, we can take that regarding any particular section. We can take that up in the question and answer round later on, or you can email me howsoever, because I have to cover a lot of sections here. So I am focusing on just the main components and the main ingredients of the section for you to understand, right? Basic understanding of that section. So moving on to section 8. Section 8 says that people who handle these hazardous substances should take procedural safeguard. A lot of people are at a lot of various levels have n number of exposures, and we can't just harm their health because they have a duty to perform. So we have to make sure that they're fully protected, fully safeguarded. So section 8 focuses on that. People handling hazardous substances should take procedural safeguards. Moving on, section 9. So section 9 says that if there is any discharge of environment pollutants in excess, which is exceeding the minimum limit provided to that particular industry. So where there's excess pollutants, according to the set standards, then the person in charge of that area shall be held liable. Now, same concept of polluter pay and precautionary principle comes here in picture. Like we discussed, the person polluting the environment will have to compensate, no matter it was in good faith, no matter whatever precautions he took, or if he argues that I took all the necessary precautions. No, if you're polluting the environment in excess, then the standard laid down then you have to pay, and also you have to restore the environment. So it's not just compensation we're looking in, because monetary terminologies can, it's very less if we talk in environment aspect. The main agenda is to promote environment awareness and environment protection, right? So we have to restore what you've caused, what you've done, whatever harm you've caused, right? So moving on to section 10 here, it powers the central government to authorize any person to inspect the plants, machinery, equipments at any time, and also arrange inspections without any due notice, and they can ask the occupier to be present, and they have a standard laid down. These are the basic necessities as per every industry they have to meet. So everything is connected here in section 10 because it's a procedural thing, right? So after that, they have to make a report. They have to, if they feel that the industry is not performing well, they may close the industry. They have that authority. Central government has that authority, like we just discussed. At any point of time, they can just simply give the notice of closure. Section 11, it empowers central government to give any officer the authority to collect samples from that very particular industry for inspection. Moving on, the very next section, it talks about empowering the central government to appoint any analyst. So like I said, it's very, it's written wise. Now, when you inspect, not everybody can inspect. You have to have an expert or an analyst who will tell you whether all these standards are being met, which are laid down by the central government in their official notifications. So under this section, they appoint any analyst to analyze the samples which they collect, and also it's their job to collect the samples, inspect the whole premises. Moving on, the next section, it talks about reports signed by the analyst. So every analyst, when we talk about, it has to prepare a report. What all samples he collected, what were the standards that were maintained, what were not, how many pollutants were released, and all of that. It's a documentary evidence, if we may say, and analyst has to prepare that report and has to submit to the central government. Now, section 15 under this act is a very important section because it talks about the penalty for the people who are the polluter and who are not in not performing their tasks and are in violation. So section 15 talks about that. So one of the main object of the act is to provide deterrent and appropriate punishment, because we can't just allow any person to get away with anything. You are polluting the environment, you're causing a global harm, and the country is investing so much to protect it. So you can't just get away, right? So we have to be very deterrent and appropriate in punishing the polluter. So one of the main objects is to provide deterrent and appropriate punishments to the people who do anything against the act so as to damage the environment. It is a punishable act. I will just bifurcate the punishments. Imprisonment, which may extend to 5 years, a fine, which may extend to 1 lakh rupees, and in case, depending upon cases to cases, it can be both. So I will just give you one example here. MC Mehta versus Kamal Nath. So like I said, MC Mehta is one of the famous litigator in environmental law. He spreads a lot of environment awareness. So here, the Supreme Court talked about the concept of polluter pay. The Supreme Court also focused on the fact that if any person, any polluter has been imposed with any fine, then in that case, if the person does not pay that fine, then the person is liable to face trial, and if found guilty, will be liable for punishment. So we are not just letting anybody get away very easily. We are according to the concept of polluter pay, which is one of the most important ingredients of environmental law. I will keep emphasizing on this again and again because the entire environmental law revolves around certain these concepts only. So in this very judgment, Supreme Court said this. Now moving on, what is National Green Tribunal and how it came in picture and National Green Tribunal Act. So let's discuss that one by one. So for the first time in India, I would like to mention very famous Justice P.N. Bhagwati. He was the first person to advocate regarding the need of environmental courts. He was the first person to very stringently and very categorically say that we need to have environmental courts for various other reasons, because there is a lot of pressure on judiciary with the ongoing litigation. So we need to have a separate body who will just independently regulate the problems related to the environment. So as environment awareness also grew with time, so the role of the judiciary also became more important and prominent. And to clear some burden from judiciary, there was a need for an alternative mechanism. So Supreme Court in various cases pointed out that there is an urgent need to environment experts, because earlier when there was no NGT and people used to file writs, PILs in Supreme Courts or the High Courts. So apart from the ongoing litigation, there was a lot of burden. So time and again, Supreme Court has emphasized on the need of having an independent body to see the environment related issues, where there will be environment related experts who will administer the justice and the act, and it will be an independent body and a specialized court. So in the meantime, before the current acts which are in picture, we had certain other acts which are not now in picture. So first was National Environment Tribunal Act 1995 and National Environment Appellate Authority Act 1997. So during that, prior to these acts, Environment Protection and NGT, National Green Tribunal Act, these were the two acts which were enacted. So there's a very famous landmark case which we all study in environmental law. So I will just give a brief of it. It is AP Pollution Control Board versus MV Nayada. So the Supreme Court here requested the Law Commission of India to examine and consider the question of establishing an independent authority here. Here, Supreme Court said, you please prepare a report to the Law Commission. You please submit a report to us. You please tell how and when things can be done, how to go about it, what will be the basic agendas for establishing these independent authorities, and how will they be governed. So the main focus was to establish an independent and a specialized court for environmental courts. So on 23rd September 2003, the Law Commission in its 186th report recommended setting up of separate environment courts. So after that, certain courts, separate agendas, things were discussed, implemented, amended time to time regarding this specialized course, and with the flexibility, flexibility in mind, time and again these will be amended as per the needs and wants of the society, and these are not very strict and not very stringent. So that was then after the Law Commission report, the separate independent body, which is the National Green Tribunal, came into picture. So therefore, taking in consideration also, we have certain cheating. Before the National Green Tribunal Act, there was a National Green Tribunal Bill, then it was passed by both the houses in the parliament as the procedure it was. So after coming on to that, moving on to the next topic is what the NGT really focus on when we talk about National Green Tribunal. What is National Green Tribunal and what it mainly focuses on? So there are certain concepts which I am about to discuss here. NGT mainly focuses on maintaining harmony between the developmental aspect and environment. Because even if we have to protect the environment, like I keep on repeating it again, but we also have to development. We also have to focus on the development. We also have to focus on developing the country, right? So the National Green Tribunal focuses on that, maintaining in harmony between both the things, because obviously both are important. Then also it handles multidisciplinary issues related to the environment. It gives you speedy justice now that there is an independent body and only dealing with the environmental aspects. So the burden is removed from judiciary. You get speedy justice because only that body is only listening to, it's only related to the environmental related issues. It also, and it's very important, it's one of the most important agendas that the NGT follows, is that it checks the implementation of legal rules by governing bodies. It really focuses on that whatever judgment they've passed, whatever it is being followed by the state governments. State governments are making sure that it is being implemented. So now what is the tribunal? What constitutes the tribunal? The composition. So Section 4 of the National Green Tribunal Act, which was passed in 2010, talks about the composition of the tribunal. So the tribunal needs a full-time chairman and not less than he should be of the chairperson. The minimum requirement of the chairperson is that he should have a qualification in this particular field. He should know. He should be a retired Supreme Court judge or a retired High Court judge. Then there are, apart from the chairperson, there are judicial members, which the qualification for judicial members are retired High Court judges. So not anybody who is not less than this will not be a part of the judicial team. Then each bench, there are a number of benches of the National Green Tribunal. So each bench constitutes of one chairman, one judicial member, or an expert. Because we need to have an expert in certain areas, he need to analyze a lot of aspects. So expert members should have a minimum qualification of 15 years to be very precise, and they should have a professional qualification in the Environment and Forest Department. So only that person who meets these requirements, who meets these basic necessities, can constitute, can come as an expert to the bench. Now, what all acts are governed under NGT? One being Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, Forest Conservation Act, Environment Protection Act, Biological Diversity Act, Public Liability Insurance Act, and Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act. So these are the main acts that are being followed in NGT. I would like to mention here, let's talk about the powers. So the powers of the National Green Tribunal. Section 19 mainly focuses on the powers. It deals with the procedures and the powers that are to be followed. So as a matter of practice, we file an OA in the NGT, and that is how the case proceeds. If otherwise you want to file, you can directly approach any state High Court or the Supreme Court and file a writ or a PIL. And if the Supreme Court deems fit, they will transfer the matter to the National Green Tribunal. If they want to decide it independently, they will do so. But as a matter of practice, what mainly happens is they pass it on to the National Green Tribunal. You please give the verdict on it. Then the order of the National Green Tribunal is appealable to Supreme Court. So here, when we talk about this, I will discuss them in certain pointers, which being, tribunal is bound by the procedure laid down under CPC. It shall be governed and guided by the principle of natural justice. Every person, even the person who we allege as the polluter, right, has a right to be heard. So we go by the concept of natural justice. Then tribunals have to be formed for discharging its sanction, and they shall have the same powers as of the civil courts under the criminal procedure laws for matters relating to 1, enforcing the attendance of any person, B, examining the person on oath, C. Discovery and procedure of documents. Reviewing its decision, passing of interim orders if required, issuing commissions for examining a witness. Moving on to section 20. Now, these are all, they come under the ambit of National Green Tribunal's procedure, right? And what are the powers? So section 20 focuses on, while passing an order, we have to apply the concept of sustainable development in and polluter pay everywhere. So whatever judgment, whatever verdict the NGT passes, or any bench passes, or any tribunal passes, they have to keep in mind that sustainable development and polluter pay concepts are to be focused on. The person who is found guilty of polluting the environment, he will compensate and restore the environment in its original form, no matter how much time he takes, no matter the amount of fine. Moving on to section 21. Sorry. So section 21, decision of majority members is binding. So here a lot of, like it is being followed in the Supreme Court and everywhere, majority members decision is binding, no matter whatever the ratio of the bench is. If there is a difference of opinion, the chairperson shall hear, if not heard, and decide accordingly, and refer the matter to other members who haven't already heard. So this is a very important point that is practiced in NGT, that if there is a difference in opinion, for example, if a particular bench not comprising of the chairman heard a matter and they have difference in opinions and there is no majority, then that matter will be referred to the chairperson and then he will decide the matter, and he will, whatever he will decide will be binding. If you want to appeal, that's a matter of right, you may approach the Supreme Court. Moving on to case laws, the Yamuna Conservation Case Law. So in this particular case law, the NGT ordered Pollution Control Committee to take strict actions against industries which release toxin materials and pollute Yamuna. So it was a case we all may have talked about, read about, studied about in our curriculum, or maybe read it just newspapers, because it went for a very long time. Even the Ganga pollution case. So here in this very particular case, the NGT ordered that please you have to take strict actions against all the industries, keeping in mind the polluter pay concept, that who whatever industries are harming the environment, deteriorating the environment, they have to have pay, they have to take they have to make compensations, pay compensations, restore the environment, and you have to take strict actions against them. The 52-kilometer stretch, if I talk about the particular this case, the 52-kilometer stretch of Yamuna in Delhi and UP as a conservation zone and pollution parameters have raised high on graphs. So this was the main concept while this case was going on, that day by day, when the case is not decided, until it is decided, the graphs in particular area like UP and Delhi, the pollution, the amount of pollutants being released by these industries are increasing. So we really need to take some strict actions. One more case that comes in my mind when I talk about this concept is Rathi Steel and Power Limited plant case. It was a very famous case. It was a plant based in Ghaziabad. So it was a very high, given just a brief, it was a very highly polluting industry. So the central government was notified, somebody had notified regarding this, and the central government under its powers gave the closure notice to this very particular steel plant, and they were told that you have to shut your industry because you are exceeding the number of pollutants released in the environment. And even after the interim order, they had not taken any effective effects to prevent and control these environmental pollutants or the release or the deterioration. So that is why they were given the closure notice. So this very case, these very case, Yamuna Conservation case and the Rathi Steel are one of the main prominent judgments apart from others in the NGT. There are other also Rohtang Pass glacier case, then the Taj trapezium case, very famous MC Mehta's Taj trapezium litigation, and various others. So I would just like to conclude my topic for today. I've taken a lot of time. I just realized. I'm really sorry. Is when we talk about how do we relate environment, and when we talk about the Constitution of India, how do we relate the environment laws, and how do we relate the Supreme Court guidelines and the Supreme Court, what is the role of the Supreme Court? So when we talk about first thing, role of protection of the environment, we have to consider a lot of aspects. One being, Supreme Court of India has been playing the most important role in protection of environment, because initially Justice P.N. Bhagwati had talked about establishing independent and specialized courts. So basically, as the evolution of or the awareness of the environment has been increasing, the role of judiciary has also been increasing, and they play a very prominent role. So in environment, judicial activism means the duty of the courts to take appropriate remedies for environment protection. It is the duty of the judiciary, the bench, the National Green Tribunal per se, to take and to pass the judgments which protect the environment, which focuses on sustainable development, which focuses on polluter pay principle, and the main agenda is to keep intact the principles laid down in the Stockholm Declaration. So now the right to live has been internationally recognized. If we talk on a global level, although environmental issue is a globally recognized issue, it is not an isolated issue to any particular area or any particular nation. So a right to live in a healthy environment is a recognized law in all over the countries, and has been taken as a fundamental rights by mainly most of the countries who are a part of the UN Charter. So judicial activism, when we talk about this word in India, how do we relate to it? Can be seen through the concept of PIL, which is the public interest litigation under Article 32 to the Supreme Court and under Article 226 to the High Court. It was because of the Supreme Court that the rights to life and liberty under Article 21 of the Constitution of India came to be included under this very right, under this very ambit of environmental law. The principle of locus standi was related, and people were made aware more and more, because the basic concept Supreme Court again and again has reiterated. Even the National Green Tribunal has reiterated in the orders time and again that we have to focus on the basic agenda of the environment protection. So I would like to conclude my webinar. I hope it was an insightful webinar. And for any queries, because all these principles are being discussed, we were short of time, are being discussed in a very gist manner, and I've tried to cover every aspect. So whoever who has to be, who has any doubt or has any question in particular, so you may please message me. You may please take my contact number from the organizers. You may please write down my email ID. It's SIDDEEMIDDEEAL, Siddhi Mittal @gmail.com. You may please message me your queries, and we can discuss in detail all the provisions here. So thank you so much for being so patient, and over to you, Nitesh sir.
Thank you, Siddhi, for such an informative session and wonderful webinar. Now I request Nalini to kindly take up the questions. Those are lying on the board one by one. Nalini, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. So let's just start with the queries. The first query is from Rishabh Jain, sir. As you are saying that deterrence is one of the agenda to protect the environment, then why global warming keeps rising by each passing year, as the average temperature of the Earth rises by 2 degrees Celsius during the last 50 years? And apart from the deterrence, what are the alternative measures to protect and improve the environment?
Thank you, sir, for this question. Yes, I will agree that global warming has risen to very good extent, and so, but the basic concept is people are becoming aware now there were a lot of, if we talk about greenhouse effects, if we talk about global warming, so a lot of people were not aware earlier. There were emission of certain gases with certain projects, and there came a stage in the country and all over the world where global warming was at its peak. It is rising, sir, but if we compare the ratios of previous years and now, so we may please ascertain and we may conclude that this is not increasing on a very rapid scale. It is increasing in a very slow scale now because people are taking measures. Still, sir, like always, a lot has to be done, and we will be doing in the coming years and making more people aware, taking necessary actions. So I hope that answers your query.
The next query is from Kiran Yadav. Why is enacting legislation that bans pollution the least likely anti-pollution policy for cost-benefit analysis?
Can you please repeat the question?
Why is enacting legislation that bans pollution the least likely anti-pollution policy for cost-benefit analysis?
See, cost benefit analysis, if I may say, is one aspect. But if you ban certain industries or you close certain industries over a time due to the aspect that they are polluting, they are causing pollution, they are maybe exceeding the amount of pollutants. So cost is not the primary factor. Like I'm trying to emphasize, the primary factor is sustainable development. We have to focus on emphasizing, we have to on restoring the environment. The damage that has already been caused, we have to focus on that and restoring the environment to its original condition. I think so it will be very wrong to suggest, ma'am, that the concept is, before closing industry, the concept is a very cost effective thing. Yes, that is one factor, I will not deny it. If we see it in daily basis or the procedure laws, but it is not the only factor. The main is, for example, if like I discussed the Yamuna case or the Rathi Steel case. So I'll give you an example with the Rathi Steel judgment only. Ma'am, an interim order was given to them and they were told to close the certain parts of the industry which were giving or emitting a lot of pollutants, exceeding a particular amount laid down by the government, given to them in their tender by the central government, that this very amount you can release as the pollutant, because that very amount is not very a large amount, and that still enables to the idea of preserving the environment, but they did not do so. For a period of time, when the central government kept on reiterating their fact and kept on emphasizing, they still did not do so. So end of the day, the agenda was to restrict the environmental deterioration. So they were given a closure notice. So it is not just the only factor. The main agenda behind this to restore environment and also to focus on sustainable development. If you may further, if you want to further ask in this very aspect, so you may please seek permission and you can unmute yourself. I don't know if I'm satisfying your questions or not at the very moment. So I would want to know that, please.
The next is from Rishabh Jain. Ma'am, he's asking that can you please talk about the Shriram fertilizer case and the Bhopal tragedy case?
So these are very detailed case, and I don't think so we have that amount of time. If you want to do that, you may please mail me. We can talk about and we can discuss about the various aspects of the Bhopal tragedy case and the other case law, because talking not just about the facts, because apart from the facts, there were certain legislations and certain agendas and principles focusing in the judgment. So we may have to discuss it in a little detail. If I may be allowed by Nitish sir, can we discuss that if we have time?
No, we are running short of time already.
Yeah, so I may just please request this respectable person, whoever has asked this question, to please mail me this question or leave your email ID with the organizers, and I will provide you with the basic agendas, basic principles laid down in these very particular cases.
The next is from Nitesh Mehra, sir, who has the responsibility to execute the orders of the NGT.
Very well, sir. Nitesh sir, so like I mentioned earlier, NGT will pass a judgment and NGT will not focus on execution. It lies upon the state government to see whether those orders are executed or not. Like I said, if an order has been passed or any approval has been given, so firstly the central government will come and will inspect your place, will see, will analyze, will collect samples. Then later on, the state government. So if you have to challenge anything also, the central government will also become a party because it has given you an NOC. And also the state government will also become a party because it provided you with the NOC. So apart from that, both the independent bodies have to actually focus on implementation. But the main role of this is of the state government, where that very particular project that you challenged was taken place or is there or is established.
These are the queries for today. Ma'am, can you please drop your email ID in the chat box? Thank you so much.
Thank you. I will just write down. You may please. I have shared my email ID with everybody. I hope I was able to answer all your queries to your satisfaction.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much, Siddhi ma'am, for speaking on environmental law, NGT practice and procedure. The webinar was candid and articulative. The webinar today was also very informative. Not only this, ma'am, by providing such output and law about the topic was of immense knowledge for all of us, and the eyes of many would get open on the subject. Last but not the least, we want to thank all our viewers who were with us today in the short journey of today's webinar. Ma'am, we would like to have more such informative session from you on the other subject of law in future. Thank you so much, ma'am, for enlightening us.
Thank you so much, Kriti. I think Nitesh sir has to take credit for this, for having me on board. And we can definitely organize such webinars. And I hope this was informative. And if you have any queries or you want to discuss any provisions, you may please message me or mail me on my email address.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Kriti, for giving us such wonderful thanking note for our today's speaker. And I'm always blessed to have such good moderators with me in my team who takes this webinar to the proper end and the conclusion. Last but not the least, today's speaker, once again, I'm thankful to Siddhi Mittal, who has prepared it very well from her heart. She has tried to cover all the aspects of the environment law, covering the NGT and its execution till the Supreme Court. Nowadays, this law is of such a wing which is coming up as a practice generating for the young lawyers who have their hearts attached to the environment. So with this, I would also like to thank our today's collaborators, Legal Route Lift, and as well as our DICE attorneys. And we will request all the viewers that you will be shortly receiving a feedback form. You have to fill in that form and you have to register yourself, and then you will be getting the today's e-certificates on your email ID. Thank you, Siddhi. Thank you, Kriti. Thank you, Nalini. And thank you to all my viewers who has been with us in the short span of this journey. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.